Frank Sinatra utterly hated Marlon Brando. Now we know the reason why, and that reason cost Hollywood over $80 million in today's money. Imaging, you are in 1955 and at the set of Guys and Dolls. A sullen Frank Sinatra sits in his trailer, refusing to emerge for the third time that day. Across the lot, Marlon Brando, Hollywood's newest golden boy, deliberately mispronounces his co-star's name loud enough for everyone to hear. Where's Sinatra? The crew freezes. The feud that was about to explode would last for decades, leaving a trail of sabotage projects, stolen roles, and at least one threat involving broken kneecaps. But was it really about a woman, as many believe? Or something deeper? Something that cut to the very core of what made Sinatra who he was? If you're new here, now's the perfect time to hit subscribe, because what you're about to learn about two of Hollywood's biggest legends has been carefully buried for over half a century. Until now. To understand why Frank Sinatra came to utterly despise Marlon Brando, we need to pull back the velvet curtain on one of entertainment's most complex, troubled, and jaw-droppingly influential figures. Francis Albert Sinatra entered the world fighting for his very life on December 12, 1915, in Hoboken, New Jersey. Born blue and not breathing, the 13-pound infant was literally left for dead until his quick-thinking grandmother held him under cold water, shocking him into his first breath. It was a dramatic entrance for a man whose entire existence would be defined by drama. That traumatic birth left physical scars, a perforated eardrum and facial scarring, but the psychological scars came from his home life. His mother, Dolly, was a formidable figure in the Italian-American community, a backroom abortionist, Democratic Party fixer, and rumored bootlegger who commanded both respect and fear. Can you picture young Francis watching his mother's brutal efficiency, learning that power was everything and weakness was unforgivable? My mother, Sinatra reportedly once said, could kill a man for looking at her the wrong way, and sometimes I wish she had. His father, Antonino Marty Sinatra, was a bantamweight boxer turned firefighter, a quiet, gentle counterpoint to Dolly's hurricane personality. From this complex parental dynamic, young Frank inherited both his mother's ruthless ambition and his father's simmering sense of inadequacy. A combustible combination that would later explode when anyone, especially someone like Brando, dared to challenge his hard-won status. The Hoboken of Sinatra's youth was no picture postcard. It was a gritty, violent dockside town where ethnic tensions simmered and erupted regularly. As an Italian-American in a predominantly Irish neighborhood, young Francis learned early to use his fists, and later his razor-sharp tongue, as weapons of survival. But there was something else brewing inside this skinny, blue-eyed teenager. A voice that would eventually make women faint, men envious, and music history inevitable. His first public performance came at age 8, standing on a bar at a local tavern singing Night and Day for spare change. By 15, he dropped out of school, determined to become the next Bing Crosby. But Sinatra wanted more than Crosby's success. He wanted to surpass it, obliterate it, make people forget Crosby had ever existed. This pathological competitiveness, the need not just to win but to annihilate his rivals, would become the festering root of his hatred for Brando decades later. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In 1935, after winning a talent contest with his vocal group the Hoboken Four, Sinatra got his first taste of fame on the Major Bowes Amateur Hour radio show. He never looked back. The group toured, but Frank quickly abandoned them for a solo career, the first of many times he would ruthlessly discard people who were no longer useful to his ambition. Are you seeing the pattern forming? The man who would later develop an obsessive hatred for Marlon Brando was already revealing a character defined by ambition that bordered on predatory, and Hollywood hadn't even met him yet. By 1939, Sinatra had joined Harry James's band, but within months he jumped ship for the more prestigious Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. It was with Dorsey that Sinatra learned the breath control and phrasing that would define his singular style, a style that Brando would allegedly mock years later to devastating effect. But even success with Dorsey wasn't enough. In 1942, Sinatra forced his way out of his contract, allegedly with some help from his mafia connections, a shadow that would follow him throughout his career. Tommy Dorsey reportedly said, "The only two people I've ever been afraid of are my wife and Frank Sinatra." Now a solo artist, Sinatra's stardom exploded into the phenomenon known as Sinatra mania. Bobby Soxers, teenage girls, screamed, fainted, and tore at their clothes when he performed. At the Paramount Theater in New York, riots broke out as 30,000 fans tried to squeeze into a 3,500-seat venue. Can you imagine the intoxication of that power? The skinny kid from Hoboken had become a cultural force, worshipped with an intensity that bordered on religious. This was the throne Sinatra sat upon when a young mumbling actor named Marlon Brando began his own ascent to stardom. The early 1940s saw Sinatra conquer another medium: film. With movies like Anchors Aweigh and Take Me Out to the Ball Game, he established himself as more than just a singer. He was becoming an all-around entertainer. But the cracks were already showing. His first marriage to childhood sweetheart Nancy Barbado was crumbling under the weight of his countless affairs. Most notably, his highly publicized relationship with actress Ava Gardner became tabloid fodder, a volatile, passionate romance that would break his heart and, some say, permanently deepen the darkness in his soul. By 1946, Sinatra's star began to fade. His arrogance had alienated fans, his voice was failing due to vocal cord hemorrhages, and a new generation of singers was emerging. Then came Columbia Records dropping his contract, MGM terminating his movie deal, and his agent walking away. The fall was catastrophic. The man who had once commanded thousands of screaming fans found himself playing to half-empty rooms. His income plummeted from $100,000 per week to barely $1,000. His suicidal thoughts during this period are well documented. Sinatra allegedly once standing on a New York hotel ledge ready to jump before friends pulled him back. But here's where the story takes its most dramatic turn, one that would later fuel his hatred for Brando with white-hot intensity. Because while Sinatra was falling, Brando was rising. And not just rising, he was revolutionizing the very art form Sinatra had tried to conquer. In 1951, with his career in tatters, Sinatra desperately pursued the role of Angelo Maggio in From Here to Eternity. He knew it could save him. He reportedly offered to do it for practically nothing, $8,000 instead of his usual $150,000. It worked. The role revitalized his career, winning him an Oscar and launching what became known as the greatest comeback in entertainment history. This professional rebirth coincided with his founding of Reprise Records and the formation of the legendary Rat Pack: Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford. But something had changed in Sinatra. The fall and resurrection had hardened something inside him. The new Frank was darker, more controlling, increasingly prone to volcanic rages that terrorized everyone from waiters to fellow performers. Ask yourself, is this a man who would tolerate being upstaged by anyone? Especially someone like Brando, whose very approach to acting seemed designed to make traditional performers like Sinatra look outdated? The 1950s and 60s saw Sinatra at the height of his powers, commercially successful, artistically respected, and politically connected. His legendary status was cemented, his influence unquestioned. When Sinatra walked into a room, the room adjusted to him, not the other way around, until Marlon Brando refused to adjust. The two men were a study in contrasts. Sinatra, disciplined, meticulous, old-school professional. Brando, intuitive, unpredictable, rebellious innovator. Sinatra believed in entertainment, Brando believed in art. Sinatra demanded respect, Brando seemed indifferent to it. Did you know that before their paths crossed professionally, Sinatra allegedly referred to Brando's breakthrough performance in A Streetcar Named Desire as that mumbling kid pretending to be tough? The seeds of resentment were already planted, but it wasn't just professional jealousy. As Sinatra rebuilt his empire, he became increasingly protective of his image and authority. His connections to organized crime weren't just rumors, they were documented relationships with figures like Sam Giancana and Lucky Luciano. These were men who understood power the way Sinatra did, absolute and unquestionable. Brando, meanwhile, was becoming known for his liberal politics, his civil rights activism, and his open contempt for Hollywood's hierarchy. While Sinatra cultivated presidents and mob bosses, Brando marched with Martin Luther King Jr. and championed Native American causes. Their collision was inevitable. Two planets in the same orbit with fundamentally opposing gravitational pulls. As Sinatra consolidated his position at the center of the entertainment universe, one quirk became infamous: his pathological need for control. This manifested in bizarre dictates to those around him. All ice cubes in his presence had to be made with distilled water. Hotel rooms had to be exactly 64 degrees. And perhaps most tellingly, no one was allowed to wear the color orange in his presence. Why orange? The reason has never been confirmed, but insiders allegedly trace it to an early career humiliation involving an orange-clad heckler who reduced Sinatra to tears. True or not, the orange prohibition became emblematic of his need for absolute control. Now imagine this control-obsessed perfectionist coming face-to-face with Brando, a man who famously refused to memorize lines, who changed dialogue on a whim, who treated scripts as loose suggestions rather than sacred text. A man who, according to set rumors, once deliberately wore an orange shirt to a meeting with Sinatra just to observe the reaction. Blink and you'll miss the Alfred Hitchcock connection here. The master of suspense reportedly considered casting both men in Strangers on a Train before deciding they were too volatile a combination, even for a thriller about murder. Leave a comment if you caught that Easter egg. By the mid-1950s, Frank Sinatra was more than an entertainer. He was an institution. His legendary sessions with Capitol Records produced albums like Songs for Swingin' Lovers and In the Wee Small Hours that redefined popular music. His film career included hits like The Man with the Golden Arm and The Manchurian Candidate. His political influence extended to presidents, his social circle included royalty, and his romantic conquests were innumerable. In other words, he had everything, except the ability to tolerate the one man who seemed immune to his power. And in 1954, their worlds would violently collide in a project that would transform a professional rivalry into a personal vendetta. Are you Team Sinatra or Team Brando? Type it in the comments now while we continue, because what happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about both men. But beneath the perfectly tailored tuxedo and that million-dollar smile, one name was etched in acid on Frank Sinatra's soul: Marlon Brando. The Guys and Dolls Catastrophe, 1955, Samuel Goldwyn Studios, Hollywood. Two of entertainment's most bankable stars were cast in the film adaptation of the Broadway hit Guys and Dolls. Sinatra, the obvious choice for gambler Sky Masterson, was stunned to learn he'd been given the secondary role of Nathan Detroit instead. The reason? Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz had offered the lead to Marlon Brando, an actor with no musical experience whatsoever. Adding insult to injury, Brando would be paid $200,000 plus a percentage of profits, while Sinatra received a flat $100,000. "Get that son of a bitch off my set before I have him taken care of," Sinatra allegedly told a producer when he heard the news. Hollywood's hierarchy had been upended, and the volcano that was Sinatra's temper was about to erupt spectacularly. But the casting disaster was just the opening act. The deliberate sabotage, 1955, midway through filming Guys and Dolls. Brando, insecure about his singing, reportedly requested private coaching from Sinatra, who possessed the very skills Brando lacked. Sinatra's response cut deep. "Don't worry about it, kid. Just lip sync and look pretty." Then, according to multiple crew members, he deliberately sang his duets with Brando differently with each take, making it impossible for Brando to find consistency. "He wanted me to fail," Brando reportedly said years later. "What he didn't understand was that his need to see me fail was more obvious than my actual failing." The master of control had met the master of chaos, and neither would surrender an inch. But as the production continued, the psychological warfare was just beginning. The method acting mockery. 1955, final weeks of Guys and Dolls production. By now, Sinatra was referring to Brando exclusively as Mumbles or the boy to crew members. His contempt for Brando's method acting approach became increasingly public. Brando, rather than backing down, leaned into his technique even harder, reportedly doing up to 50 takes of simple scenes, knowing that Sinatra's one-take philosophy made such repetition psychological torture for him. During one particularly tense scene, after Brando requested yet another take, Sinatra allegedly exploded. "How many times do we have to do this goddamn scene? I'm not one of your method actors who can turn it on and off like a faucet." Brando's reported response became legendary on set. "That's right, Frank. When you turn it off, it's off for good." Two competing philosophies of performance and two mountainous egos created a feud that would ripple through Hollywood for decades. But what happened next would make their on-set tensions look like a friendly disagreement. The Oscar night humiliation, 1955 27th Academy Awards. Sinatra, riding high on his From Here to Eternity comeback, was presenting the Best Actress Award. When Brando won Best Actor for On the Waterfront, he reportedly brushed past Sinatra backstage without acknowledgement. According to multiple witnesses, Sinatra, surrounded by his entourage, called out, "Hey Mumbles, congrats on the trophy. Too bad they don't give Oscars for being an asshole." Brando allegedly turned, smiled calmly, and replied, "They probably would, Frank, but you'd still come in second." The exchange was witnessed by dozens of Hollywood elites, and Sinatra's humiliation was complete, made worse because Brando had beaten Sinatra's friend Humphrey Bogart for the Oscar. Public embarrassment was something Sinatra could never forgive, especially from someone he considered his inferior. But the most personal attack was yet to come. The Ava Gardner connection, 1957, Romanoff's Restaurant, Beverly Hills. The feud might have eventually cooled had it remained professional, but then it became deeply personal. Ava Gardner, the great love of Sinatra's life, whose rejection had devastated him, began a brief but highly publicized affair with Brando. On this particular evening, Sinatra was dining with his Rat Pack when Brando and Gardner entered together. According to multiple accounts, Sinatra went deadly pale, then dark with rage. Brando, aware of Sinatra's presence, allegedly guided Gardner to a prominent table and kissed her hand with theatrical flair. Gardner, perhaps enjoying the drama, laughed loudly enough for Sinatra to hear. "That punk deliberately paraded her in front of me," Sinatra reportedly told Peter Lawford later that night. "He's a dead man walking and he doesn't even know it." The romantic triangle elevated the feud from professional rivalry to blood vendetta. But was Brando really targeting Sinatra's broken heart, or was something larger at play? To understand why Brando would risk the wrath of someone as powerful and connected as Sinatra, we need to briefly examine the rebel who changed American acting forever. Born in 1924 in Omaha, Nebraska, Marlon Brando Jr. grew up with an alcoholic mother and an absent, critical father, a childhood that fueled both his rebellion against authority and his unquenchable need for approval. After being expelled from military school, Brando drifted to New York, where he studied with acting coach Stella Adler and embraced the method approach that would revolutionize performance. His 1947 Broadway role as Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire shocked audiences with its raw intensity and animal magnetism. In Hollywood, Brando brought this revolutionary approach to films like The Wild One and On the Waterfront, creating a new template for authenticity that made traditional actors like Sinatra seem suddenly artificial and dated. While Sinatra perfected a persona, Brando disappeared into characters. Politically outspoken, sexually fluid, and professionally unpredictable, Brando represented everything the establishment-minded Sinatra resented, a new generation that didn't play by the rules Sinatra had mastered. When Brando turned down his Oscar for The Godfather in 1973 to protest Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans, Sinatra allegedly called it the act of a self-important fool. Two titans, two philosophies, two eras, on a collision course that would never resolve. The Sinatra-Brando feud continued for decades, cooling at times, but never truly ending. They avoided working together again, and Hollywood producers knew better than to suggest it. In 1969, when both men were considered for The Godfather, director Francis Ford Coppola had to choose, and his selection of Brando for Don Corleone over Sinatra for Johnny Fontaine only deepened the animosity. Many believed the character of Fontaine, a whiny singer who gets a movie role through mafia intervention, was based on Sinatra himself, adding another layer of insult. By the 1970s, both men had seen their careers evolve. Sinatra, after a brief retirement, returned as an elder statesman of entertainment. Brando became increasingly reclusive and selective about roles. Their direct interactions were few, but the tension remained whenever they occupied the same space. At a benefit concert in 1982, they reportedly found themselves in the same green room. According to a witness, they acknowledged each other with the barest of nods before Sinatra turned to Dean Martin and loud whispered, "Remember when actors had to be able to act?" The most tragic dimension of this decades-long feud is what it cost both men and us. The projects they might have created together, the performances that might have pushed both to greater heights, all sacrificed on the altar of ego and animosity. Frank Sinatra died in 1998, taking whatever unresolved feelings he had about Brando to his grave. Marlon Brando followed in 2004, equally silent about their legendary conflict. Perhaps the most poignant postscript came in a rare 2000 interview when Brando was asked about Sinatra. After a long pause, he reportedly said, "Frank and I were two sides of the same damaged coin. He needed to be loved by everyone. I pretended not to need love from anyone. We were both lying." The Sinatra-Brando feud reveals something timeless about fame, masculinity, and the cost of refusing to bend. Who was right in this epic Hollywood clash? Was Sinatra justified in his hatred of the man who represented a new era that threatened to erase him? Or was Brando right to challenge the old guard and their rules? Type your thoughts in the comments below. Team Sinatra or Team Brando, and tell us why. Our next video drops tomorrow, exploring another legendary Hollywood hatred that changed cinema forever. Click the subscribe button so you don't miss it. And remember, some details come from studio lore and remain unverified. Enjoy responsibly.